Welcome to Cyber Focus from the McCrary Institute, where we explore the people and ideas that shape and protect our digital world. I'm your host, Frank Cilluffo, and today I have the privilege of sitting down with Tom Fanning, a former CIO, CFO, and longest-serving CEO at Southern Company. I can say without exaggeration, Tom is the go-to voice from the private sector's perspective on all things cyber. You won't want to miss his insights today. Thrilled to welcome Tom Fanning with us today. Tom needs no introduction to anyone who's even can spell cybersecurity. but the truth is, and I was just mentioning this to him, and hopefully it's not embarrassing, but I see Tom as part Paul Revere. Not only are the British coming, but in this case, Russians, Iranians, Chinese, North Koreans,
Inspector.
And elsewhere. Exactly, Inspector, but also part George Washington, because in addition to recognizing and admiring problems, I think is very unique in the fact that he actually implements solutions. And it's very rare to have a CEO at a major company such as Southern Company, and in Tom's case, not only understand the minutia and the beep and squeak and the zeros and ones of some of these challenges, but also how to get stuff done from a governance perspective, how to keep his company focused and all the executives, shareholders to recognize and appreciate that these are significant issues. So bottom line, Tom, is you are a unicorn in that respect. Really appreciate the fight you've been fighting for all these years, and really appreciate you taking some time with us today.
Well, Frank, you're way too generous, but delighted to be here. And I want to throw some bouquets your way. You know, what we need right now is a consciousness in America that recognizes the threat and I think the opportunity to make this country stronger. And I think we all have this sense of patriotism right now. This threat is out there. It is on us. It is here. And we have to do something about it. I think our early work in Solarium, we had such good success with getting Congress to basically, I think, make Solarium Commission the most successful commission, I think, in terms of recommendations and implementation. And I think people are thirsting for a way forward. A way to play offense, not defense, and really make this country better. So the kinds of work you're doing right now with the McCrary Institute and everything else, really good stuff.
Well, thank you, Tom. And truth is I think we can be proud of the work that the Solarium Commission put forward. And as happenstance would have it, we just had a little bit of a mini reunion with some of our commissioners and the National Cyber Director, who was a former senior fellow of ours, and others. But before sort of jumping into where we need to go, both as a company, as a country, what companies need to be doing, what that public-private partnership could really look like to translate nouns into verbs, I'd like to step back a little bit.
Yeah.
Tell me when did you realize cyber matters, and how did you take this issue on and aggressively pursue these issues?
Real quick kudos to my board. They've always given us the latitude to get involved in issues that make the communities better off because we're there. So obviously I care about energy policy. At one time I chaired the Atlanta Fed and chaired the big advisory council to the big Fed. So I've gotten involved in other things. The cyber side of it, the national security element, was really kind of interesting. Georgia Tech, graduate school, I had a little specialty in some computer science related stuff. So I've always had that in my veins, I guess. And I think I was the only CEO in our industry, so this is electricity, to have as one of my former jobs CIO. Now, you know, it stands for Chief Information Officer. Many days, Frank, I thought that stood for career is over. Boy, what a challenging job, but what a fun job. So I've always had that kind of element. I think because of that background, right around 2012, I was asked to lead the ESCC, so you know, Homeland Security cut the nation's industry into 16 segments, electricity being one. And so I led the Electricity Subsector Coordinating Council. Within a year or so, it became very clear to me when we're concerning whether it is cyber or physical security of this very important infrastructure, that you can't live in a silo. And yeah, we can deal with our own issues, but we are inextricably intertwined with communications, with finance, and what we're fond of saying in electricity is we may be 4% of the economy, but we're the first 4%. If there
are no lights out, nothing else matters.
Have a
right?
nice day. It'll be very romantic dinners, I think is what you'll have. And so I started making some assignments at the ESCC that dealt with reaching out to these really important interdependencies. And then it got to be bigger. It wasn't just a cyber application. It really was a reimagination of what national security should be. And I started actually work with some people now that are in the administration, but trying to seek out like-minded people across the nation, held dinners and things like that. Along the way, I ran into a guy named Chris Inglis. People said, you got to meet him. What a fabulous patriot that guy is.
True that.
And so we started kind of developing this very collegial approach to a very important problem that I think when you look in Congress, people know it's an issue. Nobody knows what to do. And I think what grew out of that kind of wellspring of initiative was the Cyberspace Solarium Commission. Now, you've probably told this story before, but when Solarium was originated, this is under Eisenhower, so the Solarium word came from where they met. And it was really, the issue at hand was to reimagine national security post-World War II. And as you look at a wall map, on the right is the Soviet Union, on the left is the emergence of NATO. And I think the imagination of conflict was a tank battle on the plains of Poland. Well, as we know now, the conflict is on our shores. We are not protected by an ocean to the left and right of us, nor are we protected by friendly neighbors to the north and south. The bad guys.
No lines either, going back to sort of that World War II analogy.
Absolutely. The bad guys are on our communication networks, our electricity grid, our financial systems. And what we have to do is rethink the idea that somehow the federal government is going to take national security on their own and do it for us. The private sector emerges as an equal partner, in my view, to maintaining this nation's national security. It is a totally different picture than what we have grown up in regulation and in law and in practice. Laissez-faire government, right? Business loves that. That is absolutely insufficient, inadequate when you consider what the bad guys are trying to do to the private sector in the United States. That is, in fact, the battlefield. So I think one of the great learnings out of the Solarium Commission that you and I served on was the idea that, yeah, we're going to do the three pillars. That is, we're going to make sure that we define responsible behavior and use the full powers of state to set in place behaviors that are acceptable. Secondly, we're going to harden the attack surface. We're going to do everything we can for the critical infrastructure of the United States to deny the bad guys the benefit of an attack. And then the third pillar, we're going to create a consequence. We're going to make sure that if somebody comes after us, they pay a price for their bad behavior. And then now, so I guess this commission has 70%, 75%, somewhere in there, of its recommendations now in law. I think our executive director, Mark Montgomery, our leadership like Angus King and Mike Gallagher, boy, they were just terrific in helping us not just create a dusty policy book, but putting something in place with the power of Congress that has real teeth and makes us better as a nation. So the final thing is now we've got to operationalize what this dog has caught. And I guess I was asked by the White House to chair or the advisory board to CISA. This is the Cyber and Critical Infrastructure Security Agency inside Homeland Security, and work with the folks there to try and implement a lot of this stuff. So that's been my own personal journey. It has been just so fulfilling, and I think I think we all have a sense of patriotism about this issue. You mentioned that the bad guys, and I think the shorthand is, Russia, China, Iran, North Korea. I mentioned Spectre. I always love to use movies as kind of examples or metaphors for what's going on. Spectre, to me, comes out of the James Bond narrative, right? And it's the idea that there are global criminal enterprises that in many cases use statecraft to do their bad deeds, mostly economic. But it's not a long putt at all to see how other entities, not just criminal enterprises after money, but after ideology, can get into this area and really cause us a lot of problems. So I wish it was as easy as if we take care of ourselves with these four guys, we're going to be okay. These weapons are out there in the hands of people that don't have America's interests at heart, and we have to pull together as a nation to make us safe. That's been my passion.
That's really well said, and the truth is that the tools, technologies, and techniques and procedures that used to be in the hands of nation states alone the bar is pretty low to have a significant cyber capability today, since they're in the hands of criminal enterprises as well as anyone who's got an ideological axe to grind or anything else. And one thing we're seeing in a big way play out are proxies, that it's sometimes difficult to discern who's the puppet, who's the master. Are they nation state or aren't they? I advocated for, we used to have different delineations of state sponsors of terrorism. I think we ought to start looking at some of that delineation where maybe they're not directly sponsored by a nation state, but they've got state sponsorship and support. Something to look at. But the bottom line is that the threat spectrum is wide, varied, and comes sort of like the Star Wars bar scene. All sorts of different characters are in that.
We've all been there.
And we've all been there. Yeah, we have. But all that said and done, how did you convince others inside a major company like Southern Company to prioritize? I mean, I get it. Not all critical infrastructure is equally critical. That is the truth. You mentioned the tri-sector. Electricity is at the very top of anyone's list who spends a few minutes thinking about our critical infrastructure. But nonetheless, you've got so many responsibilities as a CEO. Shareholders, cost cutting. How did you
building a nuclear plant?
Building a nuclear plant.
First one in a generation of Americans, and first one works. The first
one post-internet, too. So, yeah.
And the second one's going to be done probably this quarter, but big deal. Here's the thing, and thank goodness the Southern Company board takes a broad view. The idea is, and this goes back to, it sounds like pablum, but it's not. This goes back to philosophy we've held as a company since it was first said in like 1914. But the idea is that we must be citizens wherever we serve, that the communities have to be better off because we're there. Southern Company is one of the biggest in the United States and the world. I think we're the second biggest in energy production. This is a little dated, but we're about the size from an energy standpoint, natural gas, electricity, as the nation of Australia. We're big. And we've always had the posture of trying to lead on important issues. It's very clear to me that when you consider these national security issues that we're talking about, and it's not just cyber, it is the protection of this nation's critical infrastructure, of which electricity is one of the most important parts, that if we can make a good impact for the nation, that also is good for Southern and its shareholders. And so my board was very much into that. Oh, yeah, absolutely. If we can be a leader here, they absolutely supported me. And I'll just call out a couple of them. One of my lead directors in the past was Steve Specker. He was the former CEO of EPRI. And so he got all the technology and all the kind of IT side of this. The other guy that's been so helpful on our board, remains on our board today, is Dr. Ernie Moniz, former Energy Secretary.
DOE, yeah.
Boy, oh boy,
Ernie's running EEI now, isn't he? No,
that's Dan Briette, who was
another
former
former
Energy
secretary. Yeah.
But Moniz is just a fabulous guy. And you talk about an engaged, involved board, they all want to see results for the effort. And he's been such a great sponsor to allow me the latitude to go do this stuff. And then it goes on beyond that. But
and you built up a lot of goodwill. You were the longest-serving CEO ever at Southern Company.
That's
correct?
Right. Yeah.
So you built up that well bank, but at the end of the day, it sounds like, in addition to the governance allowing you to do it, people recognize the need to do this.
And you hit it on the head. You gave me too much credit, but you hit the issue on the head. And as I walk the halls of Congress, you get this. Everybody understands it's a big issue, but what do we do about it?
Yep.
The translation of most CISOs tend to be very technical. And what you got to do is translate technical to shareholder value, to the concepts of risk and return.
And it is risk. And you were a CFO as well. So maybe that's what it is. It's the ingredients of having a CIO's awareness, a financial, because quite honestly, cyber is like any other risk. It is a risk. Granted, it's more pervasive in some ways than others, but you need to be able to translate that into
and it's an enormous
discussion.
Risk. And I think the challenge that I ran into very early on, and we continue to work right now, but I think we're making progress. So if you think about laissez-faire government and leave me alone, and the private sector doesn't really like the government's knee-jerk reaction to almost any problem is regulation or law.
Yep.
And the private sector says, you don't know how to run my business. And we had, as part of our ESCC practice over the decade or so that I've been involved, I quit chairing that about, the time I started chairing the CISA Advisory Boards. That was about 2 years ago. We do this grid X exercise where we try to break the electrical grid as a result of a cyber and physical attack, and then we try to put it back together. And we do this with all of government. So
spent some time on Plum Island.
Oh, yeah. The three-letter agencies, the Department of Defense, you name them.
Yep.
Great folks. And in fact, I know one of the people that is associated with you right now, Tom Bossert, a great American, so bright. So I just really think the world of the guy. I think he was on the National Security Council participating in one of the grid X's. And, there's this law where we say that the FAST Act, that in a time of emergency, the government can step in and start directing activities in major infrastructure, particularly in this case, electricity. And I remember at this one grid X exercise, Bossert invoked the FAST Act, okay? And the question that I asked him was, okay, well, now what are you going to do? We have this wonderful relationship with DOE, and we've had a terrific relationship, I think, with Homeland Security and the other really important branches of government. But the God's honest truth is government does not know how to run the private sector. They just don't.
Nor should they.
Yeah, well.
Yeah.
And so therefore, when we think about times of emergency, it becomes very clear that the private sector has to direct the activity to get America back on its feet. And so one of the most important things we can provide for, and there's more concepts out of Solarium that you worked on, is this idea of a joint collaborative environment where systemically important critical infrastructure entities can have a seat at the table and participate with the intelligence community, with our sector risk management agencies, with other brothers and sisters across the private sector, and importantly, with the people that will hold the bad guys accountable. DOD, FBI, Secret Service, U.S. Cyber Command.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we don't need to know what they do, but we want to know that they're there and that we see this all as an aspiration in real time. So this evaluation of the battlefield is such an important benefit to the private sector. So the private sector could say, you know what, I don't want to play with government. I just want to do my own thing. And my rejoinder to that is, if you are part of national security, if you do something like certainly electricity,
critical to our economy or national security,
then you have an obligation to play. You must participate to make this nation safer. If the reaction is only more regulation, more law, more cost, then that's a failed relationship. So what I always look for in the construct of this joint evaluation of the battlefield is this idea that there needs to be equilibrium in benefit and cost. And so I think we can do that. The private sector is going to want to have liability protection through its participation with government. In fact, they will open their kimono to everything going on to the critical infrastructure that they represent and let government see what's happening. That's how they're going to help us. We get advanced knowledge of all the issues. So it's not just when you think about this joint collaborative
and
environment.
the cost imposition. That's the one thing I would say in the past 5 years has changed. That we are finally not simply blaming victims, but imposing some cost and consequence and bad behavior. Not enough in my eyes, but something.
But you're absolutely right. And if we play better as private sector entities, we are safer. We are less likely to be attacked if we play in a certain manner. So that's been a lot of fun, frustrating at times, and we see successes and failures. But man, I think we're making progress. It's been really good.
Tom, I mean, you brought up sort of the concept, because it is true. The private sector is not only an equal partner. They're on the front lines of this war. They are the owners, operators, and when you think about it, if there's anything we've learned in 30 years of conflict, is you need unified actions and you need true situational awareness. Those are two things that only a joint collaborative environment can bring to this fight. Is that fair?
It's exceedingly fair, and I think there's really three things. So one is this,
and trust.
Yeah,
which you only learn by being in tough situations together, and
that's tough on both sides.
Absolutely.
I mean, I would say the intelligence community of the United States does not trust the private sector.
No joke, and they don't trust one another.
Yeah, so this is really training. In a big sense, training individuals how to behave on both sides. How should the federal government play, not just regulate, play with, collaborate the private sector? How should the private sector collaborate with government? Okay, thing number one, evaluate the battlefield in real time and get real-time intelligence. That's great stuff. Thing number two would be, people are always, I think, improved if they can do things to play offense, not just defense. So let's take the collective development. I always use my little metaphor here as a 1960s lava lamp. Now I'm dating myself. But if you look and see how all that thing on the inside of a lava lamp kind of moves and changes all the time, so do the attack vectors. So does the defense surface. And so what we always have to do is, in Ray Gretzky's words, skate to where the puck will be. Take the intelligence and do the things proactively to play offense. Whether, in fact, that is play offense and make the bad guys accountable even before they attack, or take the feedback from this evaluation of the battlefield and start to change our defenses so that we are denying the benefits to the attacker. So if the first one is see the battlefield real time, second one is be way proactive, play offense, and help ourselves before the battle exists. If the third thing then is one day, heaven forbid, the bad guys do get in. Now, we've seen a little bit of that, right? Colonial, and we've seen some other things. But in a bigger sense, is there an existential threat where, if executed against us successfully, America gets knocked down? We lose our grid for a period of time. We lose the ability to trust our water systems. We lose the ability to trust our communication systems. We lose the ability, or have it impaired, to do electronic commerce.
Mm-hmm.
Those would be awfully bad days in America. How do we get back up off the canvas?
And I'm so glad you brought that up. So, I mean, firstly, we have this delicate dance of we need to acknowledge that there's a significant risk, and we need to batten down that risk as much as we can, knowing we'll never be in a place where we could be 100% secure and protect ourselves from every perpetrator or every modality attack all the time. That's
Can't do
not
it.
possible.
That's right.
But in addition to acknowledging that we need to do more and we need to be resilient and have the ability to bounce back in the event of an inevitable bad day happening, but the flip side is we can't lose confidence in our systems, right? Because you don't even have to be successful if you lose trust in the systems, or if the general public does. They don't turn on the lights, or they don't pick up the phone.
Look what happened to our ability to travel post 9/11.
Exactly.
Yep.
Exactly. So that's a delicate balance if we to look at it even from an industry perspective, but then to step up and look at it from a national perspective. And one bit of somewhat unfinished business from Solarium that I do want to pull the thread on is COAT.
Absolutely.
Continuity of the economy. And Tom, you were a huge proponent of some of those proposals. Can you shed some light on what we're thinking here?
You know, and Frank, that is exactly kind of where I was going with this third issue. And you know, it's not just COAT, because I think COAT, and we should get into it here in a minute, we can take the principles of COAT and I think use that to our benefit in day-to-day collaboration with government.
Mm-hmm.
But here's the idea. So as that question was raised during GridX, what are you going to do? I think what we need in a time of emergency, COAT, continuity of the economy, is someone appointed in the federal government to essentially make the trains run.
Mm-hmm.
We already have an existing, I'll call it a patchwork quilt of law, regulation, executive order, and practice. But it is woefully out of date in my view. And I hear some people say, oh, well, I have the power to convene. We all know that just phone a friend during a time of disaster is a really inadequate response, in my view,
Mm-hmm.
to the time of an emergency. And for the life of me, you don't want to let an emergency happen and then try and figure out what should I do.
No joke. And you don't want to be exchanging business cards when the bomb goes off, right? Or balloon goes up.
So what we have to do at the federal government level is have a modern understanding of what the threats may be,
Mm-hmm.
of what the consequences are, and what we should do and how we should work together among the different sectors of government and the different arms that we have, whether it's CISA or FEMA or, whatever, to get America back up. On the private sector side, we need to have, in my view, a roundtable of the most critical infrastructure. That is, someone that can basically be accountable for calling the cooperation of the private sector in conjunction with government to solve the problems and solve them in a systemic way, in a way that starts with the most important stuff first and gets to the least important stuff last. And that's always a very hard problem, isn't it? I think all of us want to have our own issues look forward to in the moment, but we can't do that. We must have a sense of priority in how we stand government back up and what we decide to protect. And so that would be the issue. And that way we would have a systemic approach to solving the existential threat of the day. Oh, and wait a minute. If we develop that approach, I wonder if we can take that approach and now start using that same concept, modernized, to now do the issues of the day that will make us safer before the problem is manifested on America. So I think this COAT idea is something that we can take and really improve in America today. Now, let me just say this too. I used to be a CEO.
Mm-hmm.
And I guarantee you there's a lot of people out there that will say, boy, one of the challenges we always have as CEOs, the day you become the boss,
Mm-hmm.
you become slimmer, funnier, faster. You become this kind of deity
Mm-hmm.
inside your company, which is a horrible outcome.
Yep.
The job of a CEO, in my view, is to have this relentless desire to make today better than yesterday, tomorrow better than today, to always get better. Knowing that your job is to get better every day, you must have the humility to say, I'm not as good as I can be.
Roger that.
And government has to have that too. We should never, as a society, have the hubris to say, I'm doing all I can do and it's as good as it can be. Baloney.
Yep.
And I think the private sector working with government can make America a lot better in this regard. So staying where we are.
That alone, if everyone got up every morning with that mindset, I think we'd be light years ahead.
Well, but that's what we have to do.
But we're always reacting to what's in our inbox and the crisis and the immediate fire. And that's hard because everyone they're putting out fires all day, right?
Well, yeah, but that's why you hire good people.
There you go.
know, and you do have to deal with the here and now. But the what may be, I think, particularly in this regard, where the circumstances are changing every day,
Mm-hmm.
and the threats are things that we can't even imagine. You know, it's going to another concept, but diversity and inclusion.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I get race and gender, and yeah, I know we need all that stuff, but diversity and inclusion goes way beyond race and gender. It's, you know, it's religion and sexual orientation and country of national origin and, you know, what's your economic background? Are you rich?
Mm-hmm.
You poor? You this?
Mm-hmm.
You're that? What we're really after here is not just the demographics of diversity, but rather increasing our cultural bandwidth so that we're not looking through a knothole in a fence. We have a much broader view of the unseen outcomes of the future.
Mm-hmm.
If you and I were the only two people working on something, we would see the future in a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
And as things change, we would be able to react in a certain way. But if we have a much broader perspective on what the future may be, and a broader perspective on how to adjust, as we invariably will have to, as a nation, as an individual, as a company, we're going to be so much better off. This idea of value as a function of risk and return. What I think diversity and inclusion, this broad cultural bandwidth, gives you is this idea of a broad perspective and risk reduction. That is really important. You can use every one of those concepts right now in this cyber issue that we're dealing with.
10-4 on that. I've never thought about it in those terms, and not to add my pet rock into this issues, but the reality is you've got other elements of society such as neurodiversity, kids who society has cast out who are really gifted when it comes to coding, when it comes to potentially being part of this big solution. And we've got a massive deficit in terms of workforce.
And you know what's
we got to do things differently. I'm not sure any of us will know what's better, but we definitely what we're doing now ain't cutting it.
And Frank, I'm fascinated with where AI will go, generative AI, and then where I think, you know, quantum computing and also, listen, that is all in our future.
That's here and now, some of it.
Yeah. but here's my thing. I have kids that are in school, and I've already run into the issue of, oh yeah, I can write this paper or get this thing to write a paper for me. Here's my thing.
That's less work for you, though, right? Because parents normally get pulled into.
Here's my thing. I'm afraid that one of the generational challenges we will have is effectively a growth of passivity. That is, I can let this machine do it for me.
True.
And what we have to do as a nation is have a vision that is generated by our own proactive thinking and action, not just letting others do for. You know, I always like to tell people as they rise up in leadership positions that you should never let anyone else define you. You always have to define yourself. And you will find that in defining yourself, in defining a vision for your business unit or your company or your industry or your nation, you will find that the origination of this, as you and I have seen in cyber, you're in the minority. It is a little bit of Paul Revere sometimes. I wouldn't say it about myself, but I would say it about us all.
Well said. No, you're spot on, and that's actually great advice, especially for some of our students listening. And I am increasingly concerned that we just know how to push the button. We don't know what goes on behind all the hard work that goes on behind to get those buttons to work.
Yeah.
And that then does become an existential issue in terms of workforce, and I am concerned about the Communist Party of China and People's Republic of China and some of the capacities they have. But without me putting words in your mouth, how would you rack and stack sort of the threat environment there? What keeps you up at night? And then I do want to discuss a little bit supply chain, because made in the U.S., how much of it actually is and what do we need to do?
Yeah, it's enormous. Lots of fun stuff there. Look, I think China is by far your biggest threat right now. Look, we know that geopolitics drive a lot of the cyber activity. We know that Russia has certain interests and they can be pretty aggressive. China's been reasonably subtle in terms of how they try to infiltrate our systems. But we know that Iran is too. North Korea looks to me like they just want to fill up their coffers because they're so poor.
Yep. State-sponsored crime, yeah.
But here's the thing. We have a really unstable world right now. So we have the conflict in Ukraine with Russia. We have the Middle East aflame. And we know that Iran is in the middle of that issue. And we have Taiwan and the South China Sea. And so you have this triad of conflict right now that puts us all in peril. And so that's where this idea of kind of the overlay of these three issues with the emergence of Spectre, this global criminal enterprise that can move within these circles, sometimes under the cover of state-sponsored terrorism or state-sponsored crime.
And they'll exploit all the situations that are there.
It's so interesting. Southern Company gets attacked about 3 million times a day.
Wow.
We know that when a hurricane comes in and our eyes are turned to making sure that the wires are up and the lights are on, we always see a spike in cyber activity around hurricanes. People move in under the cover of another challenge.
Roger that.
Well, we know that with what's happening with China, Russia, Iran, I can expect to see more activity by the bad guys.
Hey, Tom, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but we should assume that many of our systems, including some of our most critical systems, have been compromised, yes?
Absolutely.
And if you can exploit, you can also attack if your intent is to do so, yes?
Sure.
So, assuming things go south in, let's say, Taiwan, that could have broad implications for the continental United States.
It absolutely could, yeah.
Not only the economic implications, but direct.
So let's think about that one a bit. So let's go back to Solarium and the three pillars. Let's make sure that we define behaviors and use the full power of state.
And try
we
to
have to use the full power of state.
Yep.
Not just talk.
Yep.
Right? So there is diplomacy, I get it, but sanctions and everything else. We've got to harden the attack surfaces. We've got to get as much intelligence as we can right now to the critical infrastructure to make it safer. And we've got to take action when there is bad behavior out there to make them pay. I get it. Here's the other thing. So cyber protection from a corporate standpoint is a lot like your human body. There's a lot about your body that's designed to keep the bad stuff out, keep germs out. But there's also a lot about your body that's designed to go into action when the bad stuff gets in, white blood cells, etc. The idea of cyber, as you just said, and I agree with, is a notion of, yeah, we got to keep the bad guys away. Likely the bad guys are here.
That's what I was
And
getting
so
at.
it's
Yep.
not just prevent, it's this notion of resilience. And what do we do
Minimize
about that?
the impact and consequence.
So the crown jewels in electricity
Mm-hmm.
are likely the energy management systems, not
Mhm.
just a nuclear plant or something like that. I mean, we're all designed, if we lose a nuke, we can do something else. And it's
We
really
don't want to
pretty-
lose any nukes, though.
No, I know.
Yeah, yeah,
We
yeah,
don't want any of this
yeah,
bad stuff to happen.
Yeah, yeah.
But if you can take out my ability to control the flow of electrons
We're in
across the
big
southeast or
Kimchi.
wherever it
Yep,
is,
we're in deep kimchi. Yep.
deep kimchi. So, Southern Company, and I know other people are like this. One is, okay, we've got this terrifically insulated energy management system underground, protected against all sorts of threats. We have a duplicate one that operates in milliseconds of each other in a secret location, again, underground, what have you. We have a strategy in place right now we call spare tire.
Mm-hmm.
That if we have a problem in a certain area, we can get from where the blowout occurred to a gas station, a safe place.
Mm-hmm.
It's not going to be stable, might
But
be a
it's
rough ride.
Yep, yep.
And it will let you run for a period of time. It's not sustainable in the long run. And hopefully within that period of time, you can solve your problem.
Mm-hmm.
In a larger sense, if we see more of America compromised, we have a strategy called MacGyver.
Mm-hmm.
MacGyver takes the idea that I will use what's available, knowing that I can't trust the internet, I can't trust communication systems. So what am I going to do? And interestingly, the adaptation in our industry would cause us to run the electricity sector as we ran it in the 1950s, where we didn't have all this digital stuff. We're going to have a guy go throw switches and everything else. The Achilles heel, obviously, is how do you communicate? Yes, you're at a substation, go throw the switch. We have a strategy for that. So there's this idea of, as a matter of resilience, you want to do everything you can to prevent. But if the bad stuff happens, drill your stuff on where you're most exposed and figure out a way to adapt to a position where America is safe.
Well said. And that feeds right into the broader reasoning and underpinnings behind continuity of the economy.
100%.
And I would argue that not enough of that has happened in our critical infrastructure sectors, and I hope your sage advice and loud voice, and I mean that in a positive way, can hopefully kickstart some others, because I mean, you've had massive impact, but we need those people. You need people behind you carrying that torch, and I hope, I could be wrong, but I don't think we have enough who've taken it that next mile.
It is a challenge because it requires a mindset above quarterly earnings, right?
Which is hard.
Yeah, when I talk vision, I always use the word vision and courage, because you're dealing again in the minority. You're dealing with things that you don't know. You're dealing with potential outcomes, not the here and now. And that requires courage to devote corporate resource, whether it's the scope of your ability to have a sense on dealing with an issue today versus dealing with an issue in the future. We've got to have this balance of long-term and short-term. I do this funny thing. I always define companies in three ways. There are birds of prey, there's moving prey, and there's roadkill. And typically, it really deals with a corporation's ability to have a certain set of your mind on long-run problems. I'm going to solve the long-run problem first. I'll make the short-term stuff work. That way, those are birds of prey. Moving prey would be those companies that always solve to the quarterly issue. So they will likely lose sight of the long-term problem and get into trouble if they lose that vision. And of course, roadkill are those that stick their heads in the sand and they're just trying to survive, or they lose ethics, or they lose something. Enron.
And are surprised when they get kicked in the head in the sand, and surprised.
So
when
what
they
I
get
want
kicked.
people to do is think of yourself as a bird of prey and have that long-term vision in play.
And that not to point to China, but they are in the long game.
Yeah.
Now, I still think that the big differentiator is the American dream. You wake up. I still don't know so many people who'd want to necessarily be born in Beijing or elsewhere. And this is not critical to all the good people who are born there, but the systematic, the ability to do that is hard. We're at a disadvantage there in a free market environment, but I think it's our free market environment that is the differentiator. That's the secret sauce that makes us special.
Yeah, yeah. And I think the innovation and the creativity that we have in our system relative to a communist system or a top-down directed system, I think it's going to serve us well in the long run. I'm always optimistic about that. What we need to do, however, is really reimagine how we need to work with each other, private sector and government, to make America better. That makes us all better.
Absolutely. And the reimagine, very powerful words. One last question before I ask you what questions I should have asked but didn't ask. But one thing that Southern Company was also incredibly forward-leaning on is recognition that operational technology, industrial control systems are as critical as the IT systems that underpin everything else, and to look at it with full visibility and as much situational awareness across both worlds. That should be the mainstay, but it's kind of unique. Culturally, one grew up preventing 3 Mile Isles, and other maybe dealing with the cyber ninjas, but are you seeing others sort of grasp that challenge in an aggressive
one
way?
of the things that we started when I was still doing the ESCC, and I think we're working on now, actually I work with Ann Neuberger a little bit on some of these issues on this 100-day sprint that they had, was the idea that IT/OT. So if IT is the ships on the ocean that are out there on the horizon and you can kind of see them and here again, defend yourself. OT is they're on the beach and they're trying to get in the middle of your operation.
Yep.
One of the ways that Southern's mindset has always been, going back to this idea, we always want to encourage offense, not just defense. You must play defense, but you got to play offense as well.
Never going to defend our way out of this. We're not.
So what we do is we're the only company in our industry that still does a lot of proprietary, robust research and development. We've always had that as part of our DNA. Okay, if we have this operational threat, we are going to take it upon ourselves to try and figure out what is the supply chain risk that we have. What can we do to look at this piece of equipment that otherwise looks pretty benign, but when you consider its role in how we provide electrons to Americans, holy smokes, that guy is a big, important piece of critical infrastructure.
Yeah.
So the rest of the industry uses EPRI in this big co-op, and we're one of the biggest funders of EPRI. But this idea of looking at your infrastructure, looking at the grid of the future, and in fact, an interesting outcome. If you think about, and I was working with the David Turk, who's been a great Deputy Secretary of Energy, thinking through how can we help Ukraine? What do the Russians keep bombing? The transmission system.
Yeah.
So one of the rebuild characteristics may be to create energy islands. The interesting characteristic of that's kind of the way America grew from the inception of integrated grids. But that's where we were in the 50s. We were much less interconnected than we are now. Your interconnectedness may serve as a risk factor. So
it's aggregated. Yeah,
So let's think about using technology and the advance of even changing customer requirements, where we can miniaturize what has been a central station approach to making, moving, and selling electricity to put it on the customer premises.
Mm-hmm.
The buzzword they use is microgrids.
Mm-hmm.
I can put generation on your site. I can put a way to manage the flow of electrons on your site. I can help you manage whether you want to consume or sell to the grid.
Mm-hmm.
That may be the wave of the future, instead of relying on these giant central station approaches. So that's another form, Frank, of adaptation.
Absolutely.
So I can insulate myself from attacks that are after the integrated grid.
Mm-hmm.
That's another way to look at this very tactical approach of how my assets are arrayed and to think about what the risk and return characteristic may be.
And they're not either or propositions, right? You can central and decentralize in essence.
At the same time.
At the same time. And probably we should be doing more of that, yes?
Very important observation. So often we get caught up in Washington on bills or in operational practice with false choices.
Mm-hmm.
There are things, the most powerful word maybe that we can use is and.
And. Yeah, well said. What questions didn't I ask that I should have?
Oh, listen, I think we've covered a pretty broad waterfront here. Good stuff.
Tom, I mean, the namesake of my institute is an Alabama Power
Charles
former
McCrary.
executive who
Terrific
we
guy.
love to death. And bottom line is thank you for all you've done to elevate these issues. Thank you for taking time today with all of us. And your voice is an important one, so I hope you continue to advance these issues and, most importantly, get stuff done. So thank you for all your blood, sweat, and tears, Tom.
Man, it's an honor to work on this stuff, and again, I want to thank Southern. Southern continues to support me on some of these issues, so give kudos to them. But this is going to make America better. It will make us all better, and I think the sooner we all realize that broadly, the more progress we'll make in shorter time. Good
Safer,
stuff.
stronger, better. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you.